that the viewership that had been down the last couple of years is now very much up. And in the last couple of years, we've seen Thursday night games were some of the ugliest games. But this last Thursday night game, I mean, in watching Minnesota and Kirk Cousins come back, and I mean, it was a fantastic performance from both sides. It was just beautiful football. I mean, they really played well, and I thought that to me was one of the things that we've been missing in the past. So like I said, I don't want to get on the soapbox either. I think it's a tip of the cap more to everybody involved, but it is definitely changing.
Well, and the thing about it too, and I hate to say it, fantasy football is out of control.
Yeah.
And as you're well aware, they get one defense and they get whatever 6 to 8 offensive players.
Yeah.
And that just keeps growing and growing and growing and growing. And the fans can do what they want to do, and I'm cool with that.
Yeah.
But it's just the rules have just changed so much. It baffles me.
Well, it's a great point. I mean, because I myself am a member of a fantasy football team, and yeah, I mean we actually in our league we decided that we want to try and add another flex position, but there was no conversation of that flex position being another defense or drafting individual defensive players. I know some leagues do that, but no, you're absolutely right. It's all about the points, and it's all about making the fans happy, and that feels like what the NFL is doing right now, which is kind of a fun segue because, if it's all about doing something to make someone happy, then, the Seattle Seahawks, Kansas City Chiefs, and their safety, or Seattle's safety, free safety, Earl Thomas, he, of course, wanted to hold out and was a distraction at times for the Seahawks, all in the idea of trying to get that long-term contract. From the Seahawks perspective, they didn't want to make him as happy because they didn't want to give him that long-term contract. And, I live out here in the Seattle area. I see a lot of the reports that are out there as far as, Seattle should have signed him or they should have traded him or whatever. I'm not going to get into the should have and would have and all that kind of stuff. Instead, I want to kind of talk about Earl Thomas, the player. He's a player that, I remember him back at Texas. I know you do too. Remember him back at Texas, and I thought that physically he might break down. And that's why I always thought of him as more of a cornerback prospect coming out of Texas rather than safety. And to his credit, he has emerged as one of the all-time great safeties. To me, he's absolutely a Hall of Fame player. But at the same time, I also understand why Seattle didn't want to extend him when 2 of the last 3 years he's gone down with significant injuries, bone breaks, fractures. So while it's not the surgeries, it is just the reaction to the way the NFL is, that older players are going to physically break down. And so therefore it is hard to justify giving him big contracts, especially when you're like the Seahawks, who are still making payments on some of the other players like Cam Chancellor, who physically have broken down. I want to kind of get your thoughts on anything about Earl Thomas, whether it be the historical, if you just remember him while at Texas, and of course you were with the Seahawks, I believe, that year when the Seahawks trade or drafted him. And then if you had any thoughts about maybe, I don't know what specifics you would know about the negotiating or anything like that, but times where you've been part of a negotiating situation where you've had maybe an aging player and had to make a tough decision about, do we want to bring this player back, or is it time to cut the string and let this player, even if he still has a great deal of success in his future, letting him go because that's just not the right direction for your team at that point?
Well, the key thing is Seattle took care of him. Seattle drafted him in the first, gave him a second contract, paid him very, very well.
Yeah.
And not knocking the position itself, but there's other needs, safety. You can win with average safeties. Now, don't get me wrong, he's a really good football player.
Yeah.
Not a big guy. He's a thick guy, but not a big guy. And he tries to play big all the time. He looks for the knockout hit, and that's just who he is and what he is. And that what makes him somewhat special too, because he's got so much speed, and talent that he can do that. But it gets to a point where you realize, you look at your roster and saying, holy smokes, okay, it'd be nice if we could pass block. It'd be nice if we could pass rush.
True.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because if you get a pass rush, it makes the corners and safeties' life much easier, much easier. You know, if you can pass block and score points, it makes the whole defense easier. You know, so, you know, John's really intelligent, Pete's really intelligent, and they handle it the way they want to handle it. You know, and I didn't talk to John about it whatsoever or Pete about it. You know, that's their business.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's other issues going on that need to be addressed. And, you know, like you said, he's getting older. He's not getting younger. And you need to have youth on your team. Also, you'd have salary cap, you know, so you could bring in, say, a 27-year-old offensive lineman or 28-year-old offensive lineman, you know, that can help you right away in free agency, you know. With the safety, and don't get me wrong, they're 1-11, you know, on defense, and they're all important. But you got to identify what's the biggest issues, you know, and is it us paying, you know, extending the safety and paying him more, or is it us paying 2 or 3 guys in free agency and drafting 2 or 3 guys? No one will have to pay them too, you know. So, I mean, it's tough. That's part of being a GM that I never really liked, because you make relationships with them, you know, not just with the player, but with the families and all that. But you also have to do what's best for the organization. And I feel bad for Earl. I really do. You know, and what he did, I don't agree with, but that's his decision.
Yeah.
You know, but broken leg is a broken leg. And, you know, they didn't want him to go out there and get hurt. It's part of football. As you're well aware, each week guys get hurt. Yep. And it was a fluke injury, to tell you the truth, what I saw. I mean, he hit him in the leg and snapped his leg.
Yep.
You know, but like you said, as you get older, things change. Your body changes. Your chemistry changes. And, you know, and like I said, I feel really bad for him. But Seattle's trying to do the right thing. They're not trying to mess around with Earl and say, you have to play no matter what. That's not their style. You know, you want to be here, you're here. If you're not going to be here, you're not going to be here. That's your choice. They're not going to force you. You know, and like I said, I feel bad for him.
No, I do as well. I think it's kind of a nightmare scenario for all involved because, you know, the Seahawks, I did not get the impression that the Seahawks were going to re-sign Earl Thomas. But at the same time, obviously, if the player of his ability, you know, he is a difference maker. And this is a Seahawks defense that doesn't have a lot of difference makers anymore. And so his absence, has been fairly obvious in the past, and I expect that it will be moving forward. Although I am intrigued by the talent that their incoming starter, Tedrick Thompson, former second-round pick, what he's shown so far. But I'm also kind of interested from the Kansas City Chiefs angle. And there's been a lot of talk out there that the Chiefs and the Dallas Cowboys were two teams that had shown some interest in perhaps making a trade for Thomas. And, you know, we talked about the Dallas Cowboys before, and frankly, I see the Cowboys as about a 500 kind of team. I don't know that Earl Thomas makes them a Super Bowl contender, just like I don't know that Earl Thomas makes the Seahawks a Super Bowl contender now, the way that their team is currently constructed. But Kansas City, we let off our show today, talking about the Patrick Mahomes and just the impact of the belief that Chiefs fans and the Chiefs players have now that they have a very good quarterback. And that's not any kind of knock on Alex Smith, obviously the previous starting quarterback, who's, oh, by the way, doing pretty well in Washington. But I do wonder if Earl Thomas had been traded to the Chiefs, who of course right now are hoping to get Eric Berry back, then maybe that might have been the type of player that might be able to spark that defense and really make that the type of well-rounded team that can compete for a Super Bowl. Because as much as I like what Kansas City is doing on offense, they are dead last in the NFL in several categories defensively. And I just don't know that once they start playing the better teams in the AFC and certainly the better teams in the NFC, that they're going to be able to just simply outscore teams the way they had. So, again, as I mentioned before, I'm based in the Seattle area here. A lot of negativity about, from the Seahawks perspective. it also could be argued that if you were a team like Kansas City or that close and you have a chance to get a player like Earl Thomas, that maybe they could have been a little bit more aggressive and tried to make that move. Now, unfortunately, for Seattle, for Earl Thomas, who, of course, is not likely to make as much money in his future contract as he would have had he been able to stay healthy all year long, but also for the Chiefs or any other team out there that was looking to possibly get him. As we said, it's just an ugly situation for all involved, and and it's the unfortunate reality that the older players break down more often than younger players do, and it just kind of reinforces how the draft is really the lifeblood of all these different teams.
Well, no, you're completely right. And the thing about it, any team Earl would have went to if he was traded, he would have made them better.
Certainly,
automatically. He's been around it. He's been a world champion. He's been to 2 Super Bowls. He's been around good players. He's a no nonsense, no BS guy. He's all about football through and through.
Yeah.
But also it depends what you got to give up. First of all, in compensation.
Certainly.
Which Seattle didn't want him to go. Pete loves him to death. I know that. John loves him to death.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like Cam Chancellor. They love him to death. But he had the neck issue, and it is what it is. But. It's a lot of moving parts to get it done, because it's not like you're going to waive them, someone's going to sign them and try to re-sign them, whatever. It's a legit serious trade. And like you said, you build your team through the drafts. And John, as he's done a little bit in the past but doesn't want to, is give up picks.
Yes.
That's how that organization was built when I was with them. And we made a lot of hay in the draft, and went to back-to-back Super Bowls because of it. But also, you get to a point where you got to pay them, and they all come up a year or two apart, and you got to identify who you want to pay and not pay. And it's a tough situation. It really is. But power to all the NFL players. It's not an easy business. Injuries happen. He's made really good money. It doesn't mean he doesn't deserve more. I don't know that.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't involved in the conversations whatsoever. But I just want to say he's a good football player, and that organization, Seattle's a good organization. They're not going to, downplay a guy. And as you saw Pete come out and say, don't give him some slack, because he's trying to protect him. He's like, listen, so he did what he did going off the field.
Yeah.
He's not a bad guy. He's one of us.
Exactly. And that's one of the things, again, I look at it from, I try to look at it from the player's perspective as well as the team and the organization. And so I guess when, you mentioned as he was leaving the field, and by now everybody's seen the tape, he extends his hand and raises his middle finger, and it's obviously just kind of he's very upset. But for those of us, I know that you've had, many conversations probably with Earl, or certainly we were with the team, and so you've seen him behind the scenes, and I've had my conversations with Earl as well. I mentioned earlier in the show that I rate him as a cornerback. I told him that. He was not real thrilled with that, with my putting him there, as you can probably guess. But the one thing that has always struck me about Earl Thomas is his passion. And if you have an injury of that magnitude where right off the bat, your season's over, and your chances of making some of those extra dollars, your chances of helping this team get back to the playoffs, because he is such a great teammate, I just understood the need to kind of vent some of those frustrations. So the flipping the bird to somebody, to me, I think it's almost a cultural thing. I think it's some of the older fans out there that were just so infuriated by it. I mean, I've seen Earl Thomas jerseys being burned and things of that nature. I just don't understand that. I mean, you have to appreciate this is a young man whose whole life is the game, and it just ended, and he's venting, and so it's the same way that when a couple of years ago when he said he threatened retirement because of an injury. That's the way I looked at it. I think I was happy that you mentioned about Pete Carroll kind of sticking up for him, saying cut him some slack, and that's basically how I felt too. I would argue that the Seahawks need to have a little bit of slack cut for them, because this is an aging team that is going to have to go through a little bit of a reshuffle. Earl Thomas deserves some slack because that's a huge injury he's had to go through. And then even like I said, some of the other teams out there that perhaps were looking to bring him in, as you said, Scott. I mean, it is a complicated process, and of course, no one was anticipating a freak type of injury like this one that ended his season.
Correct. Well, the thing about it, you nailed it from the get-go when you start